She folded her napkin slowly, deliberately, the way a woman does when she has made a decision that cannot be undone. The restaurant was silent. $40 dessert plates had been cleared. Crystal glasses still held the last sips of wine that nobody was drinking anymore, and every single person at that table was staring at her, waiting. Because the man at the head of the table, her fiancé's father, had just delivered the cruelest words she had ever absorbed in public. He had raised his glass in a toast and said, "To Nora, who I am sure is grateful to finally experience a meal at a place like this. Must be quite a change from flowers and whatever else it is you do." Then he paused and smiled and added, "It must be nice to finally enjoy the fruits of someone else's labor." Nobody flinched, nobody objected. His wife pressed her lips together and looked at her plate. His daughter smirked into her wineglass. A cousin cleared his throat and looked away. The silence was not shock. It was agreement. A full table of people who had spent 3 years calling this woman a gold digger, a nobody, a charity case, and now here it was, said out loud, dressed up in a toast, delivered like dessert. But what happened next changed everything. She looked at the man who had just insulted her, and she smiled, not a broken smile, not a defeated smile, a calm, steady, knowing smile. The kind of smile that comes from a woman who has been holding a secret so enormous it could flatten everyone in the room. And she said, "You are right, Frank. This is a beautiful restaurant, which is why tonight the fruits of my labor will be taking care of this." She motioned for the waiter. "A check, please, for the entire table." Before anyone could react, she reached into her small clutch purse and pulled out a card. It was not plastic, it was matte black titanium, heavy. The kind of card most people never see in their lifetime. She placed it on the silver tray. The waiter glanced at it, and something shifted in his posture. His professional composure gave way to something closer to reverence. He had been trained to recognize this card. It was an invitation-only card reserved for the most elite tier of wealth in the world. He looked at the name embossed on its surface. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Right away, Miss Ashford." The name hit the table like a thunderclap. Ashford, every fork stopped moving, every breath caught. And the woman they had spent 3 years calling worthless sat perfectly still, perfectly composed, perfectly aware of the earthquake she had just unleashed. But before I tell you what happened next, before I tell you why every single person at that table turned white as a ghost, before I tell you the truth about who this woman really was, you need to understand how we got here. Because this story, this woman, this moment, it did not begin in a restaurant. It began in a cage made of gold. Have you ever been judged by someone who did not know the first thing about you? Have you ever walked into a room and felt people decide who you are before you even opened your mouth? Have you ever been dismissed, disrespected, made to feel small by people who never once bothered to look past the surface? Because that is exactly what happened to this woman. For 3 years, and what none of them knew, what nobody in that small seaside town knew, is that the quiet woman they were mocking could have bought and sold every single one of them without blinking. So who was she really? And why did she hide? Stay with me, because this story is about to change the way you see people forever. And before we dive in, if you believe that a person's worth has nothing to do with their bank account, drop a like right now. And if this story moves you the way I think it will, subscribe to Mr. Andy Love Stories so you never miss a story like this. Now, let us go back to where it all began. Vivienne Ashford was born into a world most people cannot even imagine. Not the kind of wealth you see on social media, not influencer money or lottery winnings or a nice house in the suburbs, the kind of wealth that shapes nations. Her father, Reginald Ashford, built Ashford Pharmaceuticals from a single laboratory into one of the largest private empires on Earth. His patents alone generated more annual revenue than some countries. His company developed medications that saved millions of lives across 6 continents. Hospitals bore his name. Research facilities operated under his foundation. His signature on a contract could move global markets. Her mother, Isadora, was equally formidable. She took the family's wealth and turned it into a luxury empire: fragrances, fashion, cosmetics, all carrying the Ashford crest, all synonymous with elegance and exclusivity. Together, Reginald and Isadora Ashford were not just wealthy, they were a dynasty, and Vivienne was their only child, their sole heir, the girl who would one day inherit everything. But here is the thing about growing up inside a glass tower. Everyone can see you, and no one can touch you. Not really, not in the ways that matter. Vivienne's childhood looked like a fairy tale from the outside: private jets, estates in Monaco, London, and the Maldives, birthday parties that cost more than most people's houses. But every friendship she ever made had a price tag stitched into its seams. The children at her birthday parties were the sons and daughters of her father's business partners. The invitations were not born from affection, they were strategic. The girls who called themselves her best friends reported back to their parents about conversations at the Ashford dinner table. The boys who asked her on dates in her teenage years had been encouraged to do so by families, hoping to forge alliances. Love was a transaction, friendship was a networking opportunity, and Vivienne learned painfully and early that no one in her life saw her. They saw what she represented: access. Power, zeros on a balance sheet. When she was 21, she fell in love for the first time. His name does not matter. What matters is that she believed him. He was charming, attentive, and seemed to see the woman behind the name. For 6 months, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, someone had finally chosen her for who she was. Then she discovered the truth. He had been planted. A rival pharmaceutical company had paid him to get close to her, to extract proprietary information, to exploit the one vulnerability the Ashford empire had. Her heart. The betrayal did not just break her, it cracked something fundamental inside her, the belief that she could ever be loved for herself, not her last name. 2 years later, the unthinkable happened. Her parents were traveling to Geneva for a business summit. Their helicopter went down over the Alps. There were no survivors. Vivienne was 23 years old, and in a single morning she became the wealthiest orphan on the planet. The grief was a black ocean, endless, suffocating. But what followed was somehow worse. The vultures arrived before the funeral flowers wilted. Distant relatives she had never met materialized from nowhere, clutching forged documents and fabricated memories, claiming pieces of the estate. Ex-boyfriends filed lawsuits for emotional damages. Friends she thought were real sold intimate stories to tabloids for 6-figure payouts. Business partners circled the company like sharks scenting blood, waiting for the young heir to stumble, so they could acquire her empire for pennies on the dollar. Lawyers surrounded her every waking moment, not to protect her, to position themselves. By the time she was 25, Vivienne Ashford had successfully defended her inheritance, consolidated control of the empire, and expanded its reach into 3 new global markets. She was the youngest female billionaire in recorded history. Her face appeared on the covers of Forbes, Bloomberg, and every major financial publication in the world. She was powerful beyond measure. And she was the loneliest woman alive. One evening, sitting alone in her penthouse in Monaco, watching the sun sink into the Mediterranean, she had a realization so clear it felt like a physical blow. No one in my entire life has ever loved me. Not the real me. They loved the name. They loved the number. They loved the access. But me, the woman underneath all of it, she has never been seen. She has never been known. She has never been enough on her own. That realization did not break her. It ignited her, because Vivienne Ashford was not a woman who collapsed under the weight of truth. She was a woman who acted on it. The plan took 3 months to execute. She appointed Julian Moreau, her father's most trusted advisor, as operational steward of the entire Ashford empire. She established secure legal structures to manage her assets anonymously. She created layers of privacy so thick that not even the most determined journalist could trace her new life back to her old one. She was thorough. She was meticulous. She was a billionaire who understood that the most valuable thing in her life was the one thing money could not buy, and she was willing to risk everything to find it. She chose a town called Harrowcliff. It was not on any tourist map. It was not glamorous or trendy or fashionable. It was a small seaside town on a rugged stretch of coastline, where the wind carried salt and the mornings smelled like rain and wild grass, a place where people knew each other by first names and firm handshakes, where the loudest sound on most evenings was the ocean breathing against the cliffs. She rented a narrow apartment above a bakery on the main street. The ceilings were low, the floorboards creaked. The kitchen was barely big enough for one person, and every morning the smell of fresh bread rose through the floor like a warm hand on her shoulder. She loved it. She loved it more than any penthouse she had ever owned. She found the flower shop on her third day in town. A hand-painted sign in the window read Petal and Thorn, and beneath it a smaller sign in faded ink, Help Wanted. The owner was an elderly woman named Mrs. Bellamy, with silver hair pinned loosely and hands that smelled permanently of lavender. She asked Vivienne only one question during the interview. "Can you love flowers?" Vivienne answered without hesitation. "More than most things." Mrs. Bellamy smiled. "Then you are hired." And just like that, Vivienne Ashford became Nora, no last name, no empire, just a woman in an apron, learning the language of peonies and eucalyptus, building bouquets with steady hands and a quiet heart. She walked home each evening along the coastal path, the wind pulling at her hair, the sea churning below. And she felt something she had not felt in years, maybe ever, peace. Real, unguarded, bone-deep peace. She remembers the first night she truly laughed in Harrowcliff. She was alone in her apartment, attempting to cook pasta. She burned it, spectacularly. Smoke curled from the pot and drifted out the open window into the salt air, and she stood in her tiny kitchen fanning the smoke detector with a dish towel, and she laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a practiced laugh, a full, messy, ridiculous laugh that came from somewhere deep and untouched. The kind of laugh she had not heard from her own mouth since she was a child, and she thought, this is what it feels like to be free. But freedom, she discovered, is not the same as fullness. She had found herself, but she had not found someone to share herself with, and there was still an ache, quiet but persistent, like a note held too long on a piano, waiting for resolution. That resolution walked through the door of Petal and Thorn on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. And everything changed. He was soaking wet. That was the first thing she noticed. Rain was hammering Harrowcliff that day, the kind of sideways rain that makes umbrellas useless, and this man had clearly surrendered to it entirely. He stood in the doorway of the flower shop, dripping onto the tile floor, water running from his dark hair into his eyes, and he was grinning, not sheepishly, not apologetically. He was grinning like a man who had just survived something and found it hilarious. He looked at her behind the counter and said, "I need flowers. Something that says, I forgot your birthday until an hour ago, but I love you more than oxygen." And Nora laughed, a real laugh. The kind that escapes before you can catch it, before you can decide whether it is safe to let someone hear it. It surprised her. It was the second time in Harrowcliff that a laugh had caught her off guard, and both times it felt like a door opening. His name was Dominic Reyes. He was a high school music teacher at the local school. He taught guitar and piano, coached the town's youth choir, and played acoustic sets at a small cafe on the waterfront every Saturday evening. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with deep brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, which he did constantly. He was not polished. He was not rehearsed. He was the kind of man whose warmth did not announce itself. It simply arrived like sunlight through a break in the clouds. She built him a bouquet, sunflowers for joy, white roses for sincerity, sprigs of eucalyptus for healing. She wrapped them in brown paper and tied them with twine, and when she handed them to him, he looked at the bouquet and then looked at her, and he said, "That is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." But he was not looking at the flowers when he said it. He came back the following week, and the week after that, and the week after that, always with a reason: flowers for a student's recital, a small arrangement for a school event, something for his sister's apartment. He said, "She just moved in and the place needs life." The excuses grew thinner with each visit, but the conversations grew longer. They discovered shared loves like old poetry and the way rain sounds on a tin roof, and how certain songs can crack your heart open and put it back together in the same 3 minutes. He would lean against the counter while she worked, telling her stories about his students, about the kid who could not sing a note but showed up to every choir rehearsal because it was the only place he felt safe. She would tell him about the flowers, how each one carried a meaning, how a bouquet was really a conversation if you knew how to listen. They talked past closing time more than once. The streetlights would come on outside and the shop would grow dim, and neither of them would move to turn on a light because the half-darkness felt intimate and safe, like a space built just for the two of them. Then one evening, the shop empty, the scent of jasmine thick in the air, the rain tapping gently on the windows, he stopped pretending. He set down the flowers he had been pretending to browse. He looked at her across the counter, and his voice, usually so easy and warm, was quiet and serious. "I am not here for the flowers, Nora. I have not been here for the flowers in weeks. I am here for you." Her breath caught, not because she was surprised. She had felt it building, the gravity between them growing heavier with each visit, each lingering glance, each sentence that trailed off into silence, because the real words were too big to say out loud. She was afraid, not of him, of what he represented: hope, vulnerability, the possibility of being seen, and the terror of being seen through. She had built her walls with such care, each stone placed deliberately, each gap sealed, and here was this man, this gentle, clumsy, beautiful man, who was not trying to climb over them. He was simply sitting beside them, patient, present, asking nothing except the chance to stay. She let him stay. She opened the door. Their first kiss happened 3 weeks later, outside the flower shop, under a sky washed clean by rain. He had walked her home the way he had started doing, and at the door he paused. She paused. The space between them was charged with everything unsaid, and then he stepped forward and kissed her, and it was not fireworks, it was not an explosion. It was a homecoming, warm and steady and real, like arriving somewhere you did not know you had been searching for. They fell in love the way tides come in, slowly, surely, inevitably, not with grand declarations or dramatic gestures, with presence, with mornings where he brought her coffee at the shop and stayed to help arrange the display window, with evenings where she sat in the back of the cafe and listened to him play, her heart swelling with a fullness she had never known, with Sunday afternoons spent on the coastal path, walking hand in hand, saying nothing, needing nothing except the solid, grounding reality of each other. He loved a florist named Nora, a woman who smelled like rose petals and potting soil, a woman who could name every flower in a garden and every constellation in the sky, a woman who burned toast and laughed about it, who cried at old movies and was not embarrassed, who read poetry out loud on rainy nights with a voice that made the words feel like they had been written just for him. He did not need to know her family. He did not ask about her finances. He did not care about her history. He loved her for who she was. And for the first time in her entire life, Vivienne Ashford believed that she was enough. But love, she would learn once again, never arrives alone. It always brings a trial. The first time she met Dominic's family, she felt the air shift before she even crossed the threshold. He had been talking about this dinner for weeks. His mother Gloria, his father Frank, his sister Natasha. He spoke about them with love and pride, the way a man does when his family is his foundation. He wanted Nora to be part of that foundation. He wanted her to belong. She wanted that too, more than she could express. But she was also terrified. She had faced boardrooms full of hostile executives, 3 times her age. She had negotiated billion-dollar mergers across time zones. She had stared down corporate predators without flinching. But standing on the doorstep of a modest house in a quiet neighborhood, holding a bottle of wine and a bouquet of flowers she had arranged herself, she felt more vulnerable than she ever had in her life, because this mattered more. Gloria opened the door. She was a compact woman with sharp eyes and a smile that arrived on schedule but never quite settled. Her gaze moved over Nora the way a jeweler examines a suspect stone, searching for the flaw before acknowledging the beauty. She took the flowers with a nod and the wine with a glance at the label that suggested she was checking the price point. Inside, Frank stood in the living room. He was a retired contractor with thick hands, broad shoulders, and a handshake that lasted a beat too long. His grip was not welcoming, it was measuring, weighing. And then there was Natasha, Dominic's younger sister, a real estate agent with sharp cheekbones and sharper opinions. She was leaning against the kitchen counter with a glass of red wine, and when Nora walked in, Natasha offered a smile so thin it could cut glass. She barely said hello before turning back to her phone. The dinner table was where it began. Gloria served pot roast and questions in equal portions. "So," she said, her tone coated in sweetness so thick it felt like a warning. "Dominic tells us you work at a flower shop." She paused. "That is sweet. What about your family? What do they do?" Nora had rehearsed this answer 100 times. She had smoothed its edges until it felt natural, until it rolled off her tongue without hesitation. "I lost my parents when I was young. I do not have much family. I have mostly been on my own." The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of conclusions already drawn, full of verdicts already rendered, full of assumptions sealed and stamped before the main course had even been cleared. Natasha tilted her head. Her eyes narrowed with something that was not curiosity but calculation. No family, no career to speak of. Just flowers. She let the word hang in the air like a verdict. "Well," she said, "are you not brave?" Dominic's jaw tightened. His voice was sharp and immediate. "Natasha, that is enough." But the damage was done. In a single evening they had decided who Nora was, not based on anything she said or did, but on everything she did not have. Or so they thought. Now I want to pause here for a moment. Have you ever walked into a room and felt instantly judged, felt like people had already made up their minds about you before you even opened your mouth? Like nothing you said or did was going to change the story they had already written about you in their heads? If you have, type "I have been there" in the comments, because what this family is about to put this woman through over the next 3 years will test everything she believes about love and about herself. And if you are invested in this story, if you want to see how it ends, hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, you do not want to miss what is coming. The months that followed were a slow erosion, not a single dramatic blow, but 1,000 small cuts, each one delivered with a smile, each one designed to remind Nora that she did not belong. At a family barbecue in the summer, Gloria looked at Nora's sundress and said, "You always look so comfortable. I admire that, really. Not everyone can pull off thrift store finds with such confidence." The cousins nearby exchanged glances. Nora smiled. She said thank you. And beneath the table, her fingers pressed into her palms hard enough to leave marks. At holiday gatherings, conversations were steered with surgical precision toward topics designed to exclude her. Luxury vacations they had taken, investment properties they were considering, designer purchases, restaurant reservations at places where the tasting menu alone cost more than most people's rent. All of it delivered with sidelong glances toward Nora, checking to see if she flinched. She never did, not visibly, but the cuts went deep. Natasha was the worst. She had a gift for cruelty that masqueraded as concern. At a cousin's wedding, she leaned toward Dominic at the reception table, close enough for Nora to hear every word, and whispered, "Are you sure about her, Dom? She is so quiet. People who have nothing to hide are not usually this secretive. I am just looking out for you, you know that." "Right." Dominic shut it down. He always did. His voice would harden, his eyes would flash, and he would say something firm and protective. But the poison had been planted, and poison does not need permission to spread. Then came Dominic's birthday. His friends and family gathered at a rented hall on the edge of town. There was music and cake and laughter, and for a few hours Nora allowed herself to feel like she belonged. She had spent 3 weeks preparing his gift. It was not bought, it was built. A hand-bound journal, each page filled with music sheets she had transcribed by hand. Every page was a different song, songs that had played during their first conversation, songs he had performed at the cafe while she watched from the back table, songs they had hummed together on the coastal path on Sunday afternoons. 3 weeks of work, aching fingers, cramped handwriting. A heart poured onto paper, one note at a time. When Dominic opened it, his eyes glistened. He turned the pages slowly, recognizing each song, each memory encoded in the notes. He pulled her close and whispered into her hair, "This is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." But across the room, barely 10 feet away, Natasha leaned toward a cousin. Her voice was a whisper calibrated to carry. She could not even afford a proper present. "Made something out of paper. That is what love on a budget looks like, I suppose." Nora heard every word. Her hands trembled beneath the table. Her jaw tightened. The warmth of Dominic's embrace was still on her skin, and already it was being chipped away by the casual cruelty of a woman who had never once tried to see her. But she did not break. She did not confront. She did not confront. She did not cause a scene, because every insult was a test. Every snide remark was a question being asked of her. Is his love worth this? And every single time she answered the same way, with silence, with grace, with the quiet, unshakable belief that what she and Dominic had built was worth protecting. Even if it meant absorbing the blows alone, Dominic defended her every time. He never wavered. But the toll was showing. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes after family dinners. In the way his voice would go quiet on the drive home. He was caught between the woman he loved and the family that raised him. He believed they would come around, that if they just spent more time with Nora, if they just got to know her, they would see what he saw. She knew better, but she did not say it because she loved him too much to make him choose. Then came Easter, and Easter changed everything. The family gathered at Gloria's house. Nora arrived with homemade pastries she had baked the night before, golden and flaky, dusted with powdered sugar. She brought a bouquet of spring flowers she had arranged herself, tulips and daffodils and sprigs of baby's breath tied with a pale yellow ribbon. Gloria took the pastries with a nod, so brief it barely qualified as acknowledgement. The flowers were set on the kitchen counter and never mentioned again. Dinner was tense but uneventful. Nora tried. She complimented the food. She asked about Frank's garden. She listened attentively when Gloria talked about her book club. She was met with polite frost, responses that ended conversations rather than continuing them, smiles that did not reach the eyes. She was there but not included, present but invisible. After dinner, coffee was served in the living room. That was when Natasha reached beneath her chair and produced a small gift bag. She slid it across the coffee table toward Nora with a smile that curled at the edges like smoke. "I got you something, Nora, just a little something I saw and thought of you." The room went quiet. Every eye shifted to Nora. She could feel the weight of their attention, the subtle lean forward, the held breath. Something was wrong. She could feel it the way you feel a storm before it arrives, in the pressure, in the stillness. She opened the bag carefully. Inside was a slim paperback book. She pulled it out and read the title, How to Land a Rich Man. A Modern Woman's Guide to Financial Security Through Romance. The words hit her like a slap. The room did not erupt in laughter. That would have been kinder. Instead, there were stifled smirks, averted gazes. Gloria pressed her lips together and stared at the carpet. Frank shifted in his armchair, uncomfortable but silent. A cousin at the edge of the room coughed into his hand to hide a grin. The thick, suffocating hum of complicity. No one objected. No one defended her. No one said this is wrong. They let it happen, and in their silence they endorsed it. Dominic stood. The motion was so abrupt that his chair scraped against the hardwood floor, and the sound cut through the room like a blade. His face was stone. His voice was low, trembling with a rage, so controlled it was more frightening than shouting. "We are done here." Nora placed the book gently back on the coffee table. She did not throw it. She did not slam it down. She placed it carefully, as though it were something fragile, and stood with a composure that none of them deserved. She took Dominic's hand. They walked to the door. She did not look back. The door closed behind them softly, softer than any of them deserved. That night, in the dim amber light of their small apartment, Nora sat on the edge of the bed and wept. "But I need you to understand something about these tears." They were not for herself. Vivienne Ashford had survived things that would have crushed most people. She had buried her parents at 23. She had fought off corporate predators and Fortune 500 vultures. She had been betrayed by a man she loved who turned out to be a paid operative. She had endured the suffocating loneliness of being the richest woman in any room and the most invisible. She did not cry because Natasha gave her a cruel book. She cried because of the look on Dominic's face. The way his jaw had trembled, the way his hands had shaken as he gripped the steering wheel on the drive home, the way his eyes, those kind, crinkled, beautiful eyes, had gone dark with a pain that comes only from one place. Watching the people you love most in the world become people you can no longer recognize, she cried for him, for what he was losing, for the distance growing between him and his family, a distance they were creating, brick by brick, insult by insult. He sat beside her on the bed and pulled her close. His arms were steady, even though his voice was not. I do not care what they think. I do not care what anyone thinks. You are my home, Nora, you are my home. She pressed her face into his chest and breathed him in. And in the silence of that small apartment, a question she had been avoiding finally forced its way to the surface. How much longer can I ask him to carry this? How much longer before my secret either saves us or destroys us? 6 months passed. The relationship did not weaken under the pressure. It did the opposite. It forged itself into something stronger, the way metal becomes steel in fire. They built a rhythm together. Morning coffee at the shop, evening walks along the cliffs, Saturday nights at the cafe, where he played and she listened from her usual table in the back corner. Sunday mornings tangled together in the small bed, sunlight warming the sheets, the smell of bread rising from the bakery below. It was simple, and it was ordinary, and it was the most extraordinary life she had ever lived. Then one evening Dominic took her to the cliffs, the same stretch of coastline where they had their first real conversation outside the shop, weeks after he had first walked in soaking wet and grinning. The sun was setting, pouring gold and copper across the water. The wind was gentle. The gulls were quiet, as though they knew something was about to happen. He turned to her, and he dropped to one knee. The ring was modest, a slender band with a small sapphire that caught the dying light like a tear of joy. He had saved for nearly a year to buy it. His voice cracked when he spoke. He had clearly rehearsed what he wanted to say, but in the moment the words came out raw and unpolished and perfect. Nora, I do not have much. I am a music teacher in a small town. I cannot give you the world, but I can give you the world, but I can give you my whole heart, and I promise you every single day, for the rest of my life, I will make sure you know you are loved, not for what you have or where you came from. For who you are, will you marry me? She said yes before he finished the question. The word came out wrapped in tears and laughter and the sound of the waves below, and he stood and lifted her and held her. And for a moment, the entire world was just two people on a cliff's edge, holding each other like the only solid ground left. But when his family learned the news, the temperature dropped to absolute zero. Gloria cornered Nora in the kitchen at the next family gathering. Her face was stripped of all pretense. No more sweetened smiles, no more polite frost. This was ice, pure and sharp. I will say this once, Gloria hissed, her voice low enough that only the two of them could hear. I do not know what you are after. His savings, his future, whatever it is. But we see through you. A woman with no family, no career, no roots. You appeared out of nowhere. You have wrapped my son around your finger, and mark my words. When the truth comes out, and it always does, we will be there to pick up the pieces, and you will be gone. Nora stood perfectly still. She looked into Gloria's eyes and saw something she recognized, not hatred, not malice, fear. A mother terrified of losing her son to a woman she could not categorize, could not measure, could not control. Fear wearing the only costume it knows how to wear. Cruelty. Nora's voice was soft, steady, unbreaking. I understand your concern, Gloria. I truly do. But I promise you, the only thing I want from your son is the chance to love him and be loved in return. I hope one day you will see that, Gloria scoffed. She turned and walked away, unconvinced, unmoved, and completely, catastrophically wrong about everything. She had no idea. None of them did. They were so busy looking down at Nora that they never once thought to look up. and the day was coming closer than any of them realized when they would be forced to. All right, we are building to the moment you have been waiting for, the moment this family discovers just how wrong they have been about everything. But before we get there, if you are feeling this story right now, if your heart is beating just a little bit faster, smash that like button. Share this video with someone who has ever been underestimated, someone who has been judged unfairly, someone who needed to hear that their worth is not defined by what other people see. And make sure you are subscribed to Mr. Andy Love Stories, because this reveal is about to leave you speechless. Let us go. Frank and Gloria's 35th wedding anniversary. Dominic, who had recently received a promotion and a commendation from his school district, insisted on treating his entire family to dinner at the Meridian. It was the finest restaurant in the city, an hour's drive from Harrowcliff, the kind of place with crystal chandeliers that fractured the light into 1,000 tiny rainbows, linen tablecloths so white they seemed to glow, a wine list thicker than a novel, waiters in black tie who moved like shadows and spoke like diplomats. It was expensive, it was exclusive, and Dominic had saved for months to make it happen, because he loved his parents despite everything and wanted to honor their marriage. Nora came dressed in a simple navy dress. She wore small earrings and minimal makeup. She looked beautiful, elegant in a way that did not shout but whispered. The family barely acknowledged her arrival. Gloria offered a thin hello. Frank gave a nod. Natasha did not look up from her menu. Throughout the evening, the family directed all conversation and praise toward Dominic, his promotion, his dedication, his talent. They spoke about him with pride and admiration, and they spoke around Nora as though she were not there. She was background noise in a navy dress, a placeholder at the table, the woman who existed only in the negative space of their awareness. Then the dessert plates were cleared. Frank pushed back his chair and stood. He lifted his glass. The table quieted. "To my son," he said, his voice carrying the full weight of paternal pride. "Dominic, who has worked for everything he has, a man who earned his place in this world through sweat and through character." He paused. Let the room absorb the warmth. Then he turned to Nora, and the warmth drained from his face like water from a cracked glass. And to Nora he continued, his tone shifting into something cold and deliberate and rehearsed. "Who I am sure is grateful to finally experience a meal at a place like this. Must be quite a change from flowers and whatever else it is you do." Another pause, another look, and then the line that changed everything. "It must be nice to finally enjoy the fruits of someone else's labor." The table did not gasp. That was the worst part. Nobody flinched. Nobody objected. Natasha's lips curled into a smirk she did not bother to hide. Gloria looked at her plate, silent and complicit. A cousin shifted in his seat, but said nothing. It was not a single act of cruelty. It was a collective agreement. A unanimous, unspoken verdict delivered in a 5-star restaurant over $200 bottles of wine. "You are nothing. You are here because of our son. You have contributed nothing. You deserve nothing." Dominic's face darkened. His hand gripped the edge of the table. He opened his mouth to speak, to defend, to fight the way he always did. But Nora placed her hand on his arm, gently, firmly. Her eyes met his, and they said something he had never seen in them before. Not sadness, not defeat. Something entirely different. "Certainty, trust me," those eyes said. "It is time." And then the woman they called Nora, the woman they called a gold digger, the woman they had spent 3 years dismissing, degrading, and diminishing, did something none of them expected. She became someone else, or rather, she became who she had always been. She folded her napkin slowly, precisely the way a woman folds a napkin when she has chaired 1,000 boardrooms and commanded the attention of rooms far more powerful than this one. She placed it beside her plate. She looked directly at Frank, and she smiled. "You are right, Frank," she said. Her voice was clear and steady and carried an authority that seemed to change the very temperature of the room. "This is a beautiful restaurant, which is why tonight I would like to take care of the evening myself." She lifted her hand and signaled the waiter. He approached immediately. The check, please, for the entire table. Before Frank could respond, before Gloria could object, before Natasha could even process what was happening, Nora reached into her small clutch purse and produced a card. It was not a standard credit card. It was not even close. It was matte black, titanium, heavier than any card most people have ever held. It caught the chandelier light and seemed to absorb it. She placed it on the silver tray. The waiter looked at the card, and everything changed. His posture shifted. His professional composure, already impeccable, elevated to something else entirely: deference. The kind of deference that is not taught but triggered. He had been trained to recognize this card. It was an invitation-only card issued to a tier of wealth so exclusive that fewer than 10,000 people in the entire world held one. He read the name embossed on its surface. His jaw tightened. His voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Right away, Miss Ashford. The name exploded across the table. Ashford. The word hung in the air like smoke after a detonation. Natasha's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Ashford, she repeated, her voice sharp with confusion. Why did he call you Ashford? Nora did not answer her. She did not even look at her. Instead, she calmly reached into her clutch, took out her phone, and placed it flat on the white linen tablecloth. She dialed a number and pressed speaker. The phone rang once. A crisp professional voice answered immediately. Ashford Global, Julian Moreau speaking. Good evening, Vivienne. Nora, no, Vivienne, spoke with a voice that none of them had ever heard before, calm but commanding, precise but effortless. The voice of a woman who ran an empire. Julian. I need a status update on the Helios acquisition. Has the board finalized the merger terms? Yes, Vivienne. The deal closed this afternoon, $470 million. Helios Biotech is now fully under the Ashford umbrella. Congratulations, thank you, Julian. Also, please have the car sent to the Meridian, the Bentley, not the Aston Martin. Of course, it will be there in 12 minutes. She ended the call, placed the phone back on the table, and looked up. The silence that followed was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of reckoning. It was heavy and alive and suffocating. It pressed down on every person at that table like a physical weight. Gloria's face had drained of all color. The woman who had warned Nora to stay away from her son, the woman who had called her a schemer, the woman who had treated her like an infection to be removed. She sat frozen, her mouth slightly open, her mind visibly struggling to reconcile the quiet florist she had despised with the name she had just heard. Ashford, the Ashford. Frank's toast had evaporated from his lips like steam. The proud, patronizing declaration about the fruits of someone else's labor now hung in the air like an indictment of his own ignorance. His face was a mask of dawning horror as the mathematics of the situation became clear. The woman he had publicly humiliated possessed a fortune so vast that his entire life, everything he had ever earned, every asset he had ever accumulated, would not register as a rounding error on her quarterly statement. And Natasha, sharp, polished, always in control. Natasha. She sat absolutely motionless. Her mind was rewinding at breakneck speed through 3 years of cruelty. The thrift store comments, the whispered warnings, the book, that book, How to Land a Rich Man. She had given that book to a woman whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations. She had called a woman with a name etched on skyscrapers and hospital wings across 6 continents a charity case. She had mocked the handmade birthday gift of a woman who could have bought Dominic a private island without checking her balance. Every smirk, every snide remark, every cruel whisper, all of it rushing back now, each memory landing like a blow. The gold digger was the gold. The nobody was the somebody. The quiet woman in the simple dress was the most powerful person who had ever sat at their table, and they had spent 3 years trying to make her feel small. Vivienne looked at each of them, one by one, slowly, and there was no triumph in her eyes, no satisfaction, no vindication served cold. There was only sadness, deep and genuine and aching. The kind of sadness that comes from being unseen for too long by people who should have tried harder. For 3 years, she said, her voice soft but carrying to every corner of the silent table. I sat here and listened to you tell me I was not enough. I watched you disrespect the woman your son chose to love. I heard every whisper. I absorbed every insult. I opened every cruel gift with a smile because I believed that what Dominic and I had was worth more than my pride. She paused. Her eyes glistened but did not spill. I never corrected you, not because I was ashamed of who I am, but because I came to this town, to this life, to find something I had never had, something my name and my fortune could never buy. I wanted to be loved for who I am, not what I have, not the empire, not the name, not the number, just me, the woman who arranges flowers and walks along the cliffs and reads poetry out loud on rainy nights. She looked at Dominic, and her expression shifted. The sadness gave way to something luminous, something fierce and tender and unbreakable, and I found it with him. He loved a florist named Nora who burned toast and laughed about it, who cried at old movies and was not ashamed, who gave him a handmade journal because it was the only gift that could hold everything she felt. He loved me without conditions. Without conditions, without a single thought about what I could give him besides myself. She turned back to his family. Her voice did not waver. Your son's love was the only fortune I was ever searching for. I am only sorry that you were all too blinded by your own small assumptions to see it. She stood, slowly, with the quiet, unshakable grace of a woman who has never needed permission to matter, who has never needed applause to know her worth, who has never needed anyone's validation to stand tall. The dinner is taken care of, she said. Please enjoy the rest of your evening. She extended her hand to Dominic. He took it. He stood beside her, and together they walked out of that restaurant. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor, steady and unhurried. The heavy glass doors closed behind them with a soft, final click, and they left that family sitting in the wreckage of their own arrogance, surrounded by the deafening silence of shame. The ride home was quiet at first. The city lights streaked past the windows of the Bentley like fallen stars. Dominic stared ahead, his hands resting in his lap, his mind turning over everything he had just witnessed. The woman beside him. The woman he had proposed to on a cliff with a sapphire ring he had saved a year to buy. She was the heir to one of the largest private fortunes in the history of the world. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was full, heavy with processing, with recalibration, with the slow seismic shift of understanding. He finally spoke. His voice was raw and cracked and honest. Why did you not tell me? She turned to him, and for the first time that evening her composure softened. The armor came down, and what was underneath was not a billionaire or a chairwoman or an heiress. It was simply a woman who had been carrying a weight for a very long time and was finally ready to set it down. Because I needed to know, she whispered. Her voice trembled, and she let it. I needed to know that someone in this world could love the version of me that has nothing to prove. Not Vivienne Ashford, not the name, not the empire, not the fortune, just Nora, the woman who arranges flowers and burns toast and cries at old movies and falls asleep on your shoulder during the second act because she feels safe enough to close her eyes. I needed to know that woman was enough, just her, just me. The tears came then, quiet and steady, rolling down her cheeks in the shifting light, not tears of sadness, tears of relief, the overwhelming, almost unbearable relief of being known, fully, completely, without pretense, without performance, without a single wall left standing. He reached across and took her hand, the same hand that arranged his first bouquet, the same hand that trembled under his family's cruelty, the same hand that had just revealed an empire. He held it firmly and looked her in the eyes. I fell in love with Nora, he said, and I am still in love with her. Whatever name she carries, whatever the world says she is worth everything to me. And that has not changed, not for a single second. She closed her eyes, let out a breath she had been holding for 3 years, and leaned into him, into the warmth and solidity of the only person who had ever seen her, all of her, and loved every version. The apology calls started the next morning. Gloria called first, weeping, her voice broken by the weight of regret. She said she was sorry. She said she had been wrong. She said she did not know. Frank called an hour later, stammering through sentences. He had clearly been composing since the moment they left the restaurant. His pride was shattered, and in its place was something raw and unfamiliar. Shame that had no script. Natasha did not call. She wrote a letter. 3 pages handwritten on cream stationery, the ink smudged in places by what might have been tears. She apologized for every word, every whisper, every sideways glance. She did not ask for forgiveness. She simply laid her remorse bare and left it there, asking for nothing in return. Dominic read the letter. He read all of them. And then he set firm boundaries with the precision and care of a man who had learned through pain that love without respect is not love at all. It is just noise. He did not cut his family off entirely, but he made the terms clear. Vivienne is my family now. She will be treated with the dignity she has always deserved. That is not a request. It is the only option. The change was slow, painful, genuine. Gloria began calling Vivienne to ask how she was, not to interrogate, not to assess, just to ask. Frank invited Dominic and Vivienne to dinner and spent the entire evening listening to her. Re-listening. For the first time, Natasha, to her credit, did not try to rebuild the relationship overnight. She started small, a text message, a kind word, at a gathering. An acknowledgement that she had been wrong, not just about Vivienne's identity, but about who she herself had become. The healing was not instant. It was not dramatic. It was the slow, quiet work of people learning to see each other for the first time. Vivienne continued to work at Petal and Thorn 3 days a week. She could have bought every flower shop in the country. She could have built a botanical empire, but she loved the smell of lavender on her hands, and the creak of the old wooden floor beneath her feet, and the way Mrs. Bellamy hummed while watering the window boxes. It grounded her. It reminded her of the woman she had chosen to become, and that woman was no less real than the one who signed billion-dollar acquisition deals. With her resources, she funded Dominic's dream, a community music school for underprivileged children built on the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The same cliffs where he had proposed, the same cliffs where they had their first real conversation, the same cliffs where the wind carried salt and the gulls circled and the world felt wide enough to hold every possibility. She did not put the Ashford name on the building. Above the entrance, a simple plaque read, "Where every voice matters, they married on a Sunday afternoon." On the cliffs, naturally, the ceremony was small. Mrs. Bellamy arranged the flowers. Dominic's student sang. The ocean provided the only music that mattered. Vivienne wore a simple white dress, and Dominic wore the same suit he had worn on their first dinner date, because she had told him once that he looked handsome in it, and he never forgot. Gloria cried through the entire ceremony, and for the first time her tears were not about losing her son. They were about gaining a daughter she wished she had welcomed from the very first day. Vivienne Ashford did not change. She never needed to. She had always been exactly who she was, a woman of extraordinary power who wanted nothing more extraordinary than to be loved without conditions. The world around her changed because it was finally forced to see what had been there all along. Not the gold digger, not the charity case, not the quiet woman with nothing to offer, but the queen who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting patiently, gracefully, for the world to catch up to what one man had known from the very first Tuesday he walked into a flower shop, soaking wet and grinning. She was enough. She had always been enough. How often do we measure a person's worth by what we see on the surface? How often do we assign value to people based on what we think they have or what we think they lack? How often do we let our assumptions build walls so tall that we cannot see the extraordinary standing right in front of us? This story is not about money. It is not about revenge or vindication. It is about the quiet, unshakable power of knowing who you are, even when the world refuses to see it. Vivienne's silence was not weakness. Her patience was not submission. Her grace under fire was not passivity. It was the deepest form of strength a human being can possess. The kind that does not need applause. The kind that does not need proof. The kind that does not need proof. The kind that simply exists, steady and luminous, waiting for the right eyes to recognize it. And the people who matter, the people who truly see you, they will love you without the labels, without the name, without the number. They will love you in a small apartment above a bakery with creaky floors and the smell of bread rising through the boards. They will love you with dirt under your fingernails and pollen in your hair. They will love you when you burn the toast and laugh about it. And the ones who do not, the ones who need a matte black card and a $400 million phone call to recognize your worth, they were never really looking at you to begin with. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that true wealth has nothing to do with what you own and everything to do with who you are, then do me a favor, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has been underestimated, someone who has been judged, someone who is carrying their own hidden truth and wondering if they will ever be seen. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been misjudged by someone who did not know the real you? I want to hear your story. And if you are not already part of the Mr. Andy Love Stories family, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell, because stories like this, they are just the beginning. We have so many more to tell. Until next time, remember this, your worth is not determined by what people see, it is defined by who you are when you have nothing to prove. Peace and love.